In the case of People versus Jega, Carlo Jega and three others who were unidentified and who were all at large were charged as co-conspirators for the crime of rape. Based on the evidence presented in court, Carlo Jega and his three companions had carnal knowledge of the victim, 12 years old, by means of force. They raped the 12-year-old girl successively by means of force. Based on the evidence presented, the rape was committed in the following order. First, by Carlo Jega. Second, by Calbo. Third, by Ismael. Fourth, by Obat. The 12-year-old girl was raped 4 times successively by this man. While one of the men was raping the victim, the others were holding the legs and the arms of the said girl to prevent her from struggling. So in this case, the 4 men successively raped the victim, and that while one of them had carnal knowledge of the victim, the others were holding the victim's arms and legs to prevent her from struggling. The Supreme Court convicted Carlo Jega for 4 counts of rape. Accused Carlo Jega was convicted and held liable for 4 counts of simple rape and sentenced with 4 reclusion perpetua for each count of rape. Supreme Court said, since the victim was raped 4 times, accused Carlo Jega is responsible not only for the rape that he committed, but also for the other counts of rape that his co-conspirators committed, even if these co-conspirators were all unidentified and at large. Hence, since he was the only one arrested, he is convicted of 4 counts of rape. He is liable even for the acts of rape committed by his co-conspirators who remain to be unidentified and at large. What if A was eating in a restaurant? While A was eating in a restaurant, A suddenly smelled marijuana smoke. And so A looked on his right side, on the table, on the right side, and X could sense that the 2 men there were smoking marijuana. And so A went out of the restaurant to call for a police officer. And lucky for him, he saw a police officer in uniform inside his car, just parked near the restaurant. A told the police officer that the restaurant smelled marijuana smoke. Someone was using marijuana inside the restaurant. And so A went back to the restaurant together with the police. The police, upon entering, immediately smelled marijuana smoke. And the said marijuana smoke was coming from the table of C and M. The police officers went directly to the table of C and M. The police officers collared C and M and said, nagmamariwana kayo, ano? And then thereafter, the said police, while holding the right hand of M and the left hand of C pulled a knife from a scabbard tucked in his waist, and C stabbed the police officer at the back. The police officer, trying to protect himself, drew his service pistol in order to resist the attack of C. However, M restrained the hands of the police officer. By holding the hands of the police officer's hands, C was able to repeatedly stab the police officer until the police officer died. Question: is M a co-conspirator of C in the killing of the said police officer? Answer: yes, M is a co-conspirator of C in the killing of the police officer. In this case, M is a co-principal of C in the killing of the police officer. M is liable as a principal by indispensable cooperation. M is liable as a co-conspirator in the complex crime of qualified direct assault with murder. M's act of restraining the hands of the police while his companion C was stabbing the police at the back is a positive overt act which established that he has the same criminal intent as that of C, which is to kill the police officer. At that particular moment, because of the act done by M, an implied conspiracy was established at the spur of the moment between C and M. So this is an example of an implied conspiracy. There was no preconceived plan, but based on the acts performed by M, it reveals he has the same criminal intent as that of C. Hence, both of them will be liable as co-conspirators. One is a principal by indispensable cooperation, that is M, and the other one is a principal by direct participation. So the moment conspiracy is established, the act of one is the act of all. If conspiracy is not established, then the said perpetrators are liable only for the crime, for the act that they have committed. Their liability would be individual in nature the moment conspiracy is not established. So what if X and Y are childhood friends? They saw each other because X arrived from the US, having a vacation, and so when they saw each other, they tried to catch up things with each other. And so to catch up, they decided to have a drink in Aling Maria's Ijuan in Cubao, Quezon City. So X and Y went to Aling Maria's Ijuan at Prituhan beer house in order to catch up things about the both of them. Mildly intoxicated, X decided to sing his favorite song, My Way, in the karaoke machine. So X was singing My Way in the karaoke machine. Unknown to X, A, B, and C, regular patrons of the said beer house, who were all drunk, were listening with judgment on X singing. But X sang the song My Way in a perfect tune and timbre. And because of this, A, B, and C, whose favorite song was also My Way, got mad. Suddenly, A stood up, A grabbed an empty bottle of beer and threw the said empty bottle of beer on the table of X. And he shouted, boo! And then thereafter, A left the beer house. Thereafter, B also stood up. B, who was seated at the back of X, immediately stood up, went to X, and stabbed X in the jaw, and then thereafter, B left the beer house. Thereafter, Z stood up. Z took out his balisong, went directly to X, and stabbed X 4 times in the abdomen. X was rushed to the hospital, but X was pronounced dead on arrival. A, B, and C are arrested. A, B, and C are now prosecuted as co-conspirators for the crime of murder. The RTC found them guilty, beyond reasonable doubt, of the crime of murder. Is the judgment of the RTC correct? Are A, B, and C liable as co-conspirators for the crime of murder in killing X? Answer, no. The judgment of the RTC is incorrect. the judgment of the RTC convicting A, B, and C as co-conspirators for the crime of murder is wrong. In this case, there is neither express or implied conspiracy among A, B, and C. Therefore, only C, the person who stabbed the victim 4 times in the abdomen, shall be liable for the crime. In the given case, A stood up, threw the bottle of beer on the table of X and shouted boo. After that, he left. On the other hand, B stood up, B punched the jaw of X, and then thereafter left the beer house. Aside from the fact that A and B had already left the beer house, when C stood up and stabbed X 4 times in the abdomen, A and B's acts do not show that they have the same criminal intent as that of killing the said victim. The acts of A and B does not show that they have also the criminal intent to kill X, that they have the same criminal intent of C in killing X. There is no unity of intent. There is no unity of purpose. There is no unity of action among A, B, and C. Therefore, there's no evidence that they are co-conspirators. More than that, there's no evidence that they know each other. They're only regular based on the facts. They're only regular patrons, but there was no evidence showing that they know each other. Therefore, since the acts of A and B do not reveal intent to kill the victim, only C is guilty for the crime of homicide for having killed X. It is homicide because the stabbing was done impulsively at the spur of the moment. So in this case, although A, B, and C were charged as co-conspirators, since conspiracy wasn't established, their liabilities will be individual in nature. A and B would be acquitted. Only C will be convicted for the crime of homicide for having killed the said victim. Can a head of office be held liable as a co-conspirator in an anomalous transaction done by his subordinates by merely affixing his signature on certain pertinent documents prepared by the subordinates? In a number of cases, the Supreme Court said no. In the cases of Arias versus Sandigan Bayan and Bank, Makairan versus People, Linsangan versus People. In all these cases, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that a mere signature or approval appearing on a document does not meet the required quantum of proof necessary to establish the presence of conspiracy between the head of office and the subordinates who committed the said wrongful act. There must be another act done by the head of office to show that he is indeed a co-conspirator of his subordinates. Liability as a co-conspirator depends upon the wrong committed and not solely by reason of being the head of a government office. In the case of Fernand and Torrevillas versus People, in the case of Estrada versus Sandigan Bayan, the Supreme Court said there are 2 kinds of multiple conspiracy. We have the so-called wheel or circle conspiracy, and the other one is chain conspiracy. In the case of Fernand and Torrevillas versus People, and in the case of GMA versus People, the Supreme Court said there is wheel or circle conspiracy when a person or group of persons known as the hub deals individually with another person or group of persons known as the spokes. On the other hand, there is chain conspiracy when, just like in ordinary business transaction, there is that constant communication among the manufacturers to the wholesaler to the retailer to the consumer. That is chain conspiracy. In the case of GMA versus People, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo versus People, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the former president, was charged together with the officers of the PCSO They were charged as co-conspirators for the crime of plunder. After the ombudsman presented its evidence, the counsel of the former President GMA filed a demurrer to evidence. Ground, the prosecution failed to prove the guilt of the former president beyond reasonable doubt. The Sandigan Bayan denied the demurrer to evidence. However, the Supreme Court granted the demurrer to evidence and dismissed the case. The Supreme Court said the crime charge is plunder, and what is alleged is a will or circle conspiracy. That a person or group of persons known as the arm deals individually with another persons or group of persons known as the spouse. In order to prove the presence of will or circle conspiracy in the crime of plunder, it is necessary to establish, it is necessary to allege in the information who is the hub, who is the main plunderer, who is the public officer who dealt with the others in order to accumulate ill-gotten wealth. In this case, there is nothing in the information filed by the Office of the Ombudsman which states, which alleges who is the main plunderer. There is nothing to show. There is nothing to prove that GMA was the main plunderer because it was not even alleged in the information. Supreme Court said, without any allegation in the information as to who is the main plunderer, as to who is the hub, there can be no will or circle conspiracy. Another reason for the grant of the demurrer to evidence is that according to the Supreme Court, the only connection of the former president to the crime is that the former president wrote the word okay on the transfer of funds. Supreme Court said placing the word okay is not sufficient to establish that the said former president is liable as a co-conspirator for the crime of plunder. So in that case, the demurrer to evidence was granted and the case was dismissed. We go to certain circumstances. There are certain circumstances which affect the criminal liability of an offender. Under Article 11, we have justifying circumstances. Under Article 12, we have exempting circumstances. Under Article 13, we have mitigating circumstances. Under Article 14, we have aggravating circumstances. These are the circumstances that affect the criminal liability of an offender. So let us discuss some of the important circumstances that affect the criminal liability of an offender. Under Article 11, we have justifying circumstances. Justifying circumstances are those circumstances which, if present or attendant in the commission of a felony, the offender is said to have acted within the bounds of the law. The offender is said not to have transgressed the law. Therefore, there is no crime committed, there is no criminal liability, and as a rule, there is no civil liability. Because the offender acted within the bounds of the law. He did not transgress the law. The moment an offender is charged in court and he raised as a defense any of the justifying circumstances under Article 11, that offender is in effect admitting the acts alleged in the information, but he is trying to evade criminal responsibility by saying that his act is justified. So, the moment an accused raised as a defense a justifying circumstance under Article 11, the judge will provide for the so-called inverted trial. The hearing of the case will be on inverted trial because the burden is now shifted on the defense. The burden is shifted on the accused to prove the elements of the justifying circumstance that he is raising. If the said accused failed to prove the elements of the justifying circumstance that he is raising, it will definitely be a conviction because he already admitted the acts alleged in the information. he's only trying to evade criminal responsibility by saying that his act is justified. Under Article 11, the first justifying circumstance, the following persons do not incur criminal liability. The first among these, anyone who acts in defense of his personal rights, provided the following circumstances concur. First, unlawful aggression. Second, reasonable necessity of the means employed to prevent or repel the unlawful aggression. Third, lack of sufficient provocation on the part of the person defending himself. This is otherwise known as self-defense. Self-defense does not only include defense of one's life and limb. Self-defense also includes defense of one's honor and chastity, defense of one's property, if coupled by an attack on the person entrusted with the said property. In a number of cases, the Supreme Court has ruled that in self-defense, the primordial element is unlawful aggression. Unlawful aggression is the primordial element in self-defense because without unlawful aggression coming from the victim, there is nothing to defend. There is no reason for the accused to defend himself if in the first place, there was no unlawful aggression coming from the victim. So the first and foremost element in self-defense is unlawful aggression coming from the victim. Second element, reasonable necessity of the means employed to prevent or repel the unlawful aggression. The means used by the accused to defend himself must be reasonable, must be rational to prevent the unlawful aggression coming from the victim. In order to determine if the means employed by the accused to defend himself is reasonable, rational, you take into consideration the following factors. First, the kind and number of weapons used by the unlawful aggressor versus that of the person defending himself. Second, you take into consideration the personal circumstances of the unlawful aggressor versus that of the person defending himself. And lastly, you take into consideration the place and occasion of the assault. These circumstances will determine if the means used by the accused to defend his life and limb is rational, is reasonable. Last element, lack of sufficient provocation on the part of the accused, on the part of the person defending himself. The maxim behind self-defense is stand ground when in the right. Stand ground when in the right, it means that when the accused is where he should be, and he saw the assailant fast approaching him, it is not necessary to turn his back because otherwise he runs the risk of being stabbed at the back. Stand ground when in the right. That is the maxim behind self-defense. Insofar as self-defense is concerned, there is a case penned by your bar chair, Justice Amy Lazaro Javier. That is the case of Ganal Jr. versus People. So in the case of Ganal Jr. versus People, penned by your bar chair, Ganal Jr. and his friends were having a drinking spree. Julwin passed by. Julwin wanted to join the drinking spree. But Ganal Jr. told Julwin, huwag ka na sumali dito, lasing ka na, umuwi ka na. Julwin was mad. He wanted to join the drinking spree. So Julwin just left. However, later, Julwin returned to the place. Julwin picked stones from the ground, and Julwin threw the stones on the roof of the house of the Ganals. And because of that, the senior, Ganal Senior, went out. The old man went out and told Julwin, Julwin, ano ba? Bakit ka ba bato ng bubong ng bahay? Umuwi ka na. Yung asawa ko, si Mrs., may hypertension. Lalo tuloy, nagkakasakit dahil sa'yo, umuwi ka na. Julwin was mad. Julwin struck down the old man. Ganal Sr. and Ganal Sr. fell on the gate, motionless, unconscious. Julwin entered the gate. Julwin was armed with two large palm-sized stones. Stones kasing laki ng palm, kasing laki ng fist. And a knife. So Julwin was armed with two large stones and a knife. Julwin entered. Julwin was looking for Ganal Jr. Ganal Jr., sensing danger, came out of the house and confronted Julwin, telling Julwin to get out of the house and to go home. But Julwin rushed menacingly towards Ganal Jr. Ganal Jr. pulled out his pistol and fired shots at Julwin. Ganal Jr. consumed 5 bullets of his gun on the body of Julwin. Julwin died. Ganal Jr. is now being prosecuted for the crime of homicide. Ganal Jr. raised the defense of self-defense. Is there self-defense? Supreme Court said, speaking through your bar chair, Justice Amy Lazaro Javier said, yes, there's self-defense, and Ganal Jr. is acquitted of the crime charge. Was there unlawful aggression? Supreme Court said yes. Supreme Court said, Julwin already struck down the old man, the father, Ganal Sr. Ganal Sr. was left on the gate unconscious after being struck down by Julwin. Julwin went inside, wanting to hurt, wanting to injure Ganal Jr. and his family. There was unlawful aggression. There was a threat on the life and limb of Ganal Jr. and his family. Second, was the means employed by Ganal Jr. reasonable? Reasonable necessity of the means employed to prevent the unlawful aggression? The Office of the Solicitor General said this element is absent because Julwin was only armed with 2 large stones, 2 palm-sized stones, and a knife. Whereas Ganal Jr. consumed 5 bullets of his gun on the body of Julwin. The Office of the Solicitor said there was no reasonable necessity to fire at him 5 times. Therefore, the second element is absent and hence, it cannot be self-defense. Supreme Court said no, the second element is present. Supreme Court said the test is whether the accused believed that at that particular moment, his life and limb were in actual danger. Supreme Court said the right of a person to take life in self-defense arises from his belief in the necessity for doing so, and his belief and the reasonableness thereof are to be adjudged in the light of the circumstances as they appear to the accused, and not in the light of the circumstances as they would appear to other people. At that particular moment, Julwin felt his life and the life of his family were in danger. And he has to use all the means to prevent this man from killing his family. At that particular moment, the only objective of Ganal Jr. was to protect his life and his family from Julwin. Hence, Supreme Court said, Ganal Jr.'s act of consuming 5 bullets hitting Julwin is still reasonable based on the circumstances as they appear to Ganal Jr. at that particular moment. It should be adjudged in the light of the circumstances as they appear to him, not in the light of the circumstances as they would appear to other people. And of course, the last element is present because in that case, there was no sufficient provocation coming from Ganal Jr. In fact, he was telling Julwin, go home already, go home already. So all the elements being present, the Supreme Court acquitted Ganal Jr. of the crime of homicide. What if X has long been X has long been courting Y. X has long been courting Y. Y turned down X. One time, X went inside the bedroom of Y, wanting to molest Y. Y shouted for help. The parents of Y arrived and saw X left. So on many occasions, X would always follow Y. One time, Y's handkerchief dropped on the ground. X picked it up and repeatedly kissed the handkerchief. Wherever Y was, X would be there. One time, X went inside their chapel. The lights in the chapel was fully lighted. There were many people inside the chapel. The father of Y, the minister, was there. Y was seated on one of the benches inside the chapel. Suddenly, here comes X. X entered the chapel. X seated next to Y. X placed his right hand on the lap of Y. Y, very mad, took the fun knife that he is always bringing along, opened it, and stabbed the base of the neck of X. X died. Y is now being prosecuted for the crime of homicide. X said, or Y said, he was merely acting in self-defense. He was merely acting in defense of her honor and chastity. Is there self-defense? No, there is no self-defense as ruled by the Supreme Court in the case of People versus Jauregui. In the case of People versus Jauregui, the Supreme Court said there is no self-defense. It cannot be said that Avelina Jauregui at that time was trying to defend her honor and chastity, her life and limb. When Amado placed his hand on the lap of Avelina, the said act of Amado of placing the hand on the lap of Avelina, inside a fully lighted chapel filled with people, the father of Avelina Jauregui was there. It cannot be considered as unlawful aggression. It cannot be considered as a threat on his life, limb, honor, and chastity. In the said fully lighted chapel full of people with his father there, it is just impossible for the said accused Avelina Jauregui to be raped by a man. Therefore, since there was no unlawful aggression, there is no reasonable necessity for Jauregui to stab the said victim, the man, at the base of his neck, killing him. Supreme Court denied the claim of Avelina Jauregui for self-defense. Jauregui was convicted of homicide. But what if X was a spurned suitor of Y? On many occasions, X would follow Y. On other occasions, X attempted to kiss and to hug Y. One evening, X entered the room of Y, wanting to molest Y. He hugged Y, however, Y screamed, and the parents arrived. Since then, Y decided to arm herself with a fun knife for protection. One night, when Y was walking along a dimly lit street, X suddenly appeared and grabbed her arm firmly from behind. A struggle followed. However, X, the man who was too strong for Y, succeeded in removing Y's dress. And the said man X started touching Y's private parts. Since there were people around, Y asked for help. Y cried for help. However, her cries for help were unheeded. When her cries for help were unheeded, Y reached for her knife and thereafter stabbed X in the throat. At the time of the said attack, there were people around. So Y is now charged with homicide for having killed X. Y pleaded the justifying circumstance of self-defense. Is there self-defense? Yes, this time there is self-defense. All the elements of self-defense this time are present. First, was there unlawful aggression? Yes. While Y was walking on a dimly lit street, he was suddenly grabbed and held forcibly on the arm by X. And the said man X removed his clothing and began touching her private parts. These acts of the man place in danger the honor and chastity, the life and limb of Y. Hence, there was unlawful aggression. Was the means employed by Y reasonable? Stabbing X in the throat? Yes. There were people around. It was given in the case. It was given in the problem, however. Despite Y's cries for help, no one came to help. She was the only one who can save herself from the molestation, from the sexual acts of this man. Therefore, it is incumbent for her to stop this man in order to save her life, her honor, her chastity. The second element is present. Third element is also present. There was no provocation at all coming from Y. She was merely walking on the said street. All the elements of self-defense being present, therefore, Y should be acquitted of the crime charge. X was charged with a crime of homicide. Before the lower court, the defense raised by X is accident, an exempting circumstance. According to X, he killed Y accidentally, despite the defense raised by X. The RTC convicted X of homicide. And so X appealed. In his appeal, he changed his ground. He changed his defense. This time, according to X, he killed Y as an act of self-defense. So in the lower court, the defense raised by X, accident. Before the appellate court, in his appeal, the defense raised by X now is self-defense. Is it correct on the part of the accused to raise both accident and self-defense as defenses at the same time? The Supreme Court said no. Supreme Court said it is erroneous on the part of the accused to raise accident and self-defense at the same time because the two are inconsistent with each other. When you say accident, it is something that happened outside the sway of things. It cannot be prevented. When you say self-defense, it is a direct and positive overt act done by the accused based on the impulse of self-preservation. When you say self-defense, the accused deliberately killed the victim in order to save his own life. Hence, you cannot raise accident and self-defense at the same time because these two defenses are inconsistent with each other. There is no such thing as accidental self-defense. Under Article 11 of the RPC, under Article 11, the next justifying circumstance under Article 11, the fourth justifying circumstance under Article 11, any person who, in order to avoid an evil or injury, does an act which causes damage to another, provided the following requisites are present. First, that the evil so to be avoided actually exists. Second, that the injury feared be greater than that done to avoid it. And third, that there be no other practical or less harmful means of preventing it. This is known as, otherwise known or more popularly known as, state of necessity. For a state of necessity to lie, it is necessary that the said person was avoiding an evil or injury. And in order to avoid the said evil or injury, he does an act that brought damage to another person. The elements are again that the evil so to be avoided actually exists, that the injury feared be greater than that done to avoid it, and third, there be no other practical or less harmful means of preventing it. In case of state of necessity, there is no criminal liability on the part of the offender, but there is civil liability. And this civil liability shall be borne not only by the accused himself, but all other persons who have been benefited by the said state of necessity. So what if, based on an arranged marriage, the family of X and the family of Y has arranged X and Y to get married. But X doesn't love Y. X has no feelings for Y. It just so happened that both families believe that the marriage will be good for the both families. But since X doesn't love Y, on the exact date of the marriage, X, the woman, the bride, did not appear. Since X, the bride, the woman, didn't appear, Y and his family filed a case of slander by deed, grave slander by deed against X. The defense raised by X, he merely acted based on the four justifying circumstances. He acted in a state of necessity. Y and his family filed a case of grave slander by deed because of the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation that they encountered when X, the bride, did not appear on the wedding day. However, X said yes, he did not appear. But her act is justified. He merely acted in a state of necessity. Question: are all the elements of state of necessity present so as to free X from criminal liability? First, that the evil sought to be avoided actually exists. What is the evil that X sought to avoid? Marrying a man that he doesn't love. Second element, that the injury feared be greater than that done to avoid it. What is the injury that X feared? Living in a loveless marriage for the rest of her life. That fear of living with a man whom he doesn't love is far greater than all the shame and expenses that he has brought. Third, that there be no other practical or less harmful means of preventing. The only way to prevent a marriage is not to appear at the said marriage. Therefore, all the elements of state of necessity, the four justifying circumstances are present. Hence, the Supreme Court acquitted the said accused in the case of People versus Norma Hernandez. In the case of People versus Norma Hernandez, the Supreme Court said, yes, Norma Hernandez merely acted in a state of necessity. Therefore, she incurs no criminal liability, although she is civilly liable. But she incurs no criminal liability because the only way to prevent living in a loveless marriage is not to appear on the day of her wedding. A justifying circumstance which is not included in Article 11 is the so-called battered woman syndrome, which is found under RA 9262. So what if X and Y are husband and wife? So X and Y are husband and wife. They have been living together. X and Y, the husband and wife, have been living together for 10 years already. Since the time of their marriage, the husband, for as long as 10 years, since the time of their marriage, the husband has been physically abusing the wife. The husband will abuse the wife in the night. The following morning, upon seeing the bruises, the contusion on the face, on the different parts of the body of the wife, the husband will be asking for the wife's forgiveness. The husband will be promising the wife, I will not do it again. It will not happen again. However, The moment night comes and the husband arrived drunk, again, the husband would physically abuse the wife. This has been ongoing for 10 years. In fact, the husband is already under treatment by a psychiatrist. The wife has been under treatment by these psychiatrists because of all these physical abuses that she has been enduring from the hands of the said husband. One night, the husband arrived home. Again, as usual, the husband was drunk. Upon seeing the husband, the wife told the husband, dinner is ready. Before sleeping, you might want to fill your stomach with some food. Instead of being grateful, instead of being thankful to the wife, the husband slapped the wife 2 times. The wife answered, the wife questioned, bakit naman? Instead of answering, the husband again punched the wife, this time in between the breasts of the wife. The wife fell on the floor. The wife was crying. While the wife was down on the floor crying, the husband pulled out a knife and was about to stab the wife. But the wife shouted a very loud shout. The husband closed the knife, placed it back on its scabbard in his waist, and then thereafter went to bed. The said wife went inside the bed. She stared at her husband. While staring at her husband, she shivered in fear. For 10 years, the husband has subjected her to physical abuse. But tonight is different. Tonight, the husband attempted to stab her. Not only physical abuses, but this time, the husband attempted on her life. What if she died? What will happen to their children? Their children might also be killed. The wife was so afraid. She was crying. She was shivering in fear. The wife went to the kitchen. The wife took a knife, and the wife stabbed the husband while the husband was fast asleep. The wife is now being prosecuted for the crime of parricide. The defense raised by the wife, at the time of the killing, she was suffering from battered woman syndrome. To prove that she was suffering from such disease, battered woman syndrome, at the time of the commission of the crime, the defense counsel presented the psychiatrist who has been treating the wife for years now. And the psychiatrist testified in open court that indeed, at the time of the stabbing, the said wife was suffering from battered woman syndrome. What is the duty of the court? The court has to acquit the wife. Under section 3C of RA 9262, battered woman syndrome is a scientifically defined pattern of psychological and behavioral symptoms found in women living in battering relationship as a result of cumulative abuse. Under section 26 of RA 9262, or the Violence Against Women and Their Children's Act, victim survivors who are found by the court to be suffering from battered woman syndrome do not incur any criminal liability nor civil liability, notwithstanding the absence of any of the elements of the justifying circumstance of self-defense. Very clear? Under section 26 of RA 9262, if the said woman accused is found to be suffering from battered woman syndrome at the time of the commission of the crime, she incurs no criminal liability. She incurs no civil liability. Therefore, it is akin to a justifying circumstance. No criminal liability, no civil liability. She acted within the bounds of the law because she was suffering from battered woman syndrome. Under section 26, second paragraph of RA 9262, it is provided that to prove battered woman syndrome, there must be an expert testimony coming from a psychiatrist, coming from a psychologist. That indeed, at the time of the commission of the crime, the state of mind of the said woman accused is one who is suffering from battered woman syndrome. In this case, that was proven, therefore, the judgment should be unacquitted. What if the husband and the wife have been living for 5 years? It used to be a happy marriage until the husband lost his job. When the husband lost his job, when the husband lost the job, the said husband began going out with his friends every night for a drinking spree. Whenever the husband would arrive home, the husband would verbally abuse the wife, stating invectives, foul words against the wife, hurting the feelings of the wife, verbally and emotionally abusing the wife. The wife, hearing all these bad words against her, will just cry in silence inside the bedroom. This has been ongoing for 6 months already, since the time the husband lost his job. One time the husband arrived home. The wife was not yet there. The wife is now the breadwinner, since the husband was dismissed from the job. So the husband was already home drunk. The wife was not yet home. Minutes later, the wife arrived. It was past 9 o'clock, and the husband questioned the wife. Where have you been? The children are already hungry. Why are you so late? And the wife told the husband, it is raining hard. It is so hard to find a ride. All buses are full of passengers. I could not get a ride because of the heavy downpour of rain. Instead of pitying his wife, for the first time, the husband slapped the wife 2 times. The wife was shocked. The wife said, why? For having asked, the husband again slapped the wife another time. Thereafter, the said husband left the wife, went to the bedroom, and fell asleep. The wife, after cooking for the children, after feeding the children, went inside the bedroom. The husband was fast asleep. The wife stared at the husband. The wife was so afraid. For 6 months, the husband has been verbally abusing her. This time, the husband did not only verbally abuse her, the husband also physically abused her. For the first time, the husband slapped her 3 times. The wife was afraid. What is next to come? She might be killed. That cannot happen. And so the wife went to the kitchen, took a knife, and stabbed the husband while the husband was fast asleep. The wife is now being prosecuted for parricide. She raised the defense of battered woman syndrome. Will battered woman syndrome lie in favor of the said wife? No. Battered woman syndrome this time will not lie in favor of the wife. Again, under Section 3C, battered woman syndrome is a scientifically defined pattern of psychological and behavioral symptoms found in women living in battering relationship. Under Section 3B of RA 9262, battery refers to any act of inflicting physical harm upon the woman or her child, resulting to physical and psychological or emotional distress. Therefore, to amount to battery, it is necessary that the said man must inflict physical harm upon the woman or her child. And in the case of People versus Marivic Henosa and Bang 2004, the Supreme Court said, there must be at least 2 battering episodes. There must be at least 2 battering episodes of abuses, a cycle of violence characterized by 3 phases. We have the tension building phase, the acute battering phase, and the tranquil or loving phase. In this case, the said wife suffered only 1 battering episode. For 6 months, verbal abuse. It was only on that night that she was inflicted with physical abuse. Therefore, since there is only 1 battering episode, the said wife cannot be acquitted for the crime of parricide based on battered woman syndrome. Hence, she has to be convicted of the crime of parricide. However, mitigating circumstances may be considered in her favor. Go to some of the important exempting circumstances under Article 12 of the RPC. Exempting circumstances are those which, if present or attendant in the commission of a felony, would exempt the offender from criminal liability but not from civil liability. There is no criminal liability, but there is civil liability because a wrong has indeed been committed. But the offender is exempted. The offender is absolved of criminal liability because the said offender acted without voluntariness. There is either no criminal intent, no freedom of action, or no intelligence on the part of the offender. So, if the offender in performing the act acted without voluntariness, there is no criminal liability, but since a wrong has indeed been committed, there is civil liability. Just like in justifying circumstances under Article 11, if an accused is charged in court and he raised as a defense an exempting circumstance under Article 12, it is both an admission and avoidance. The said accused admits the acts alleged in the information, but he is avoiding criminal responsibility by saying that he acted without voluntariness and therefore he is exempted from criminal liability. Under Article 12, the first important justifying circumstance is insanity or imbecility. Under the first one, the following shall be exempted from criminal liability: an imbecile or an insane person unless the latter acted during a lucid interval. An imbecile person is one who is already advanced in age, but he has only the mental capacity of a 2 to 7-year-old child. Imbecility is exempting under any and all circumstances. There is no lucid interval in case of imbecility. When you say insanity, it means the offender is suffering from total mental aberration of the mind. The said offender cannot distinguish right from wrong, good from evil, and cannot appreciate the consequences of his act. An insane person, however, may have lucid interval. Even if the offender was insane, if at the time of the commission of the crime it was proven that he was in a state of lucid interval, that he was sane at the time, then insanity will not exempt him from criminal liability. The law, the new civil code presumes that every man is sane, that every man is of a sound mind. Therefore, the law presumes that all acts are done voluntarily, willfully, and consciously. Hence, an accused who pleads the exempting circumstance of insanity has the burden of proving beyond reasonable doubt that he or she was insane immediately prior to or at the time of the commission of the crime. So what if, unknown to his wife, X is having an illicit affair with their helper? Helper Y loves the husband, but realizing that the affair is going nowhere because the husband told the helper that he cannot afford to be separated from the wife, although he loves the helper. The said helper is now or has now made a decision. The helper told the husband, according to the helper, she is already leaving the household. She is going back to the province in order to marry her childhood sweetheart. Upon hearing this, the said husband, X, was clouded by anger and jealousy. He loves the helper, but he cannot afford to be separated from his wife. And now the helper is leaving him. The husband X cannot afford that. And so that very same night, X went inside the maid's quarters and strangled to death the said helper, who at the time was fast asleep. The following day, X, the husband, was found catatonic inside the maid's quarters, near the deceased body of the maid. The said husband X was brought to the National Mental Hospital, and he was diagnosed to be mentally ill or unstable. The said husband X is now prosecuted for murder. He pleaded insanity as a defense. Question: is the defense of insanity meritorious? Answer: no. X's defense of insanity has no merit. Granting for the sake of argument that he was insane when diagnosed after killing the helper, insanity as an exempting circumstance to the commission of a crime must have existed immediately prior to or at the time of the commission of the crime. In this case, based on the facts, it is revealed that when X committed the crime, he acted with discernment. He only became ill after the act of killing. Therefore, insanity will not exempt him from criminal liability. Insanity, to be exempting, must be present either immediately prior to or at the time of the commission of the crime. What if X? So X went out of the house. X was charged with a crime of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of frustrated murder. So X was charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of frustrated murder. X's defense to the said charge of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of frustrated murder was that he was insane at the time of the commission of the crime. To prove insanity, X testified in court. X said during the hearing that at the time of the alleged incident, he was on his way to his brother's house. He left the house and he's going to his brother's house. However, on his way to his brother's house, he was stopped by the group of Pedro. Pedro and his group were having a drinking spree. Pedro and his group invited him to drink with them, but according to X, he refused. However, despite his refusal, Pedro held him by the arm and forcibly had him seated together with them in the said drinking spree. And according to X, while he was having this drinking spree, Pedro and his friends administered to him a drug, forcibly administered to him a drug. And because of the said drugs, according to X, after taking the said drugs, he fell unconscious on the chair, and when he woke up, he was already inside the prison cell. And the prison guard told him that he is being charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of frustrated murder. So according to him, he was insane at the time of the commission of the crime because of the dangerous drugs that was forced on him by Pedro and his friends. Will X's defense of insanity free him from criminal liability? No. X's defense of insanity will not free him from criminal liability. First of all, X's defense that he was insane at the time of the commission of the crime was merely self-serving. He testified in open court. He was forced to drink a drug that made him unconscious. And then thereafter, he fell on the chair. The next time he woke up, he was already inside the prison cell. If indeed it is true that because of the said drugs that was forced on him, he became insane, he would have no knowledge of what took place after taking the said drugs. He would not know that he fell unconscious on the said seat. Therefore, the defense of insanity is merely self-serving. Further, it was only X who testified as to his insanity. There was no expert witness, no doctor presented by the defense in order to testify as to the mental state of X at the time of the commission of the crime. Although a medical expert testimony is not indispensable, in this case, it becomes material because X's defense of insanity came from the administration of unalleged drugs upon him. Therefore, it is necessary for a doctor, for a medical expert to testify as to the effect of the alleged drug on his mental health, on his mental condition. Here, there was no evidence adduced in court to show the connection between the drugs that was allegedly forced on him and his accused and his alleged mental condition. Therefore, the defense of insanity will not lie in his favor.